just like welcome all of you, and especially those of you who are joining us for the first time. But in this practice, even though some of us have been here in this particular group for many, many years, we try to invoke a quality, they call it a quality, called the beginner's mind. Every time we sit down to practice, and this doesn't just relate to this practice, but it relates to every practice, whether you're practicing on your own or elsewhere. And the reason for this is because this is a practice where we try to be present in this moment. And if you were to use your mind to analyze what this means, it involves the releasing of everything that happened this morning and every previous practice you ever had. Because all that remains of your previous practices are memories. You may have experienced this or that or peace or whatever it is you may have, or even turbulence. You may not have enjoyed one or more of your previous practices. And being human beings, we can't help it if we carry memories of those practices. If you had a wonderful practice, if you've had amazing practices, whether on retreat or on your own, or sometimes it takes different forms. A practice doesn't necessarily mean sitting down in these strange postures and asking others to give us privacy. It doesn't always take this form. It can take the form of you experiencing your art. You may be a dancer, you may be a musician, you may be a painter, you may be a writer. Those moments of stillness when creativity flows through you, where you're no longer affected, no longer touched by your problems, your challenges, and you are present, allowing that energy to flow through you, becoming an empty vessel so that all that is, whether you call it creativity, presence, beingness, stillness, is simply allowed to flow through you. And we've all had those moments where we've been in crowded places, many people, many voices, but yet we've experienced that silence, that stillness. And so we've all had glimpses into stillness, into what a good practice should feel like. Usually it feels quite free, quite light, away from your challenges, away from your problems, away from your fears about the future, away from the past. And as I was saying, as human beings, we carry memories of those practices, those moments of stillness. But that's all they are, memories contained within our mind that creates time so that we may look back into the past and imagine the future. But in this practice, we speak of the beginner's mind so that we may all begin for the first time, releasing all of those standards that we have for a practice, for a sitting and breathing practice such as this. So that if your mind continues to be chatting away and busy, you see it as perfection because you no longer measure it against any past experience. And for those of us who have had bad experiences in meditation and mindfulness, you'd probably be entering into this practice right now with anxiety. What's going to happen? Busy mind, turbulence. I don't think I'll be able to last this whole hour. And you're having all of these thoughts on top of the other thoughts about what happened this morning and what happened over the past few days. When I ring the bell, let's just be okay with whatever it is we find, not only within our minds, which refers to its movements, its momentum, but let's also be fine with the sounds around us that represent the present moment. Whether it's an alarm, car alarm going off outside your window, or a loud voice, or a mobile phone, let's be okay with it. So that we remove one layer of struggle, of pushing, of unease. So all you're left with is the car alarm, but you're okay with it. The crying, screaming toddler outside your window, you're okay with it. Your moving mind, you're fine with it. A further word about the mind. How do you know it's moving? How do you know the mind is thinking? Have you ever been in a train or a car? Yes, yeah, each and every one of us will say yes to either of those modes of transport. You know you're moving because the world outside of you appears to be unmoving. And so there is, relatively speaking, you know you're moving because something else isn't. And the moment you notice any movements within your mind, memories from the past, anticipations from the future, you know it's moving simply because there is a part of you that isn't. There is a part of you that is still unmoving. Stillness itself, presence, awareness. And the moment we allow the mind to think, The moment we give our minds permission to move, it's almost as though in the background there's an understanding that it is the nature of the mind to move, simply because the mind has picked up a lot of momentum. From as early as you can remember, words, actions from parents, teachers, schools, advertising industries, religion, the books that we read, the television and cinema that we watched, all contributing to the movement of the mind that we are noticing right now. And so it's always just useful to remind ourselves that our practice is not about forcing the mind to go still, to stop the mind from moving. Mindfulness, they call this practice mindfulness, the practice of observing these movements, observing the mind, developing a new relationship with the mind. A new relationship where we shift our identification from the mind into this present moment. Mind equals time, and this present moment beyond time, the eternal present moment. Here comes the bell, beginner's mind. You could even imagine yourself taking off layers and layers of skin, becoming the child again that you once were. Because in many ways, this is a practice of unlearning, simplifying. Little child, asked to sit, to discover what sitting is. And remember, as little children, even the act of sitting, it had to be practiced. There was a point when we could not balance our bodies, when we did not know how to stand up, when we did not know how to pick up a fork or food, all practiced. And so if you were to return back to that early stage, let's discover what it feels like to be sitting. The act of sitting, it denotes a particular posture. And by all means, I am aware that some of you may find it challenging sitting, and so you may be lying down. So whatever posture you're in, be kind to yourself. Allow yourself. You might be on a chair, you might be on a mat, you might be on cushions. All I'm referring to when I say sitting is whatever posture it is that you're in. And how do you know you're in this posture? It's because of the sensations around the body. Your arms are placed in a particular way. in relation to the rest of your body. Your knee is folded in a particular way. Your neck supporting your head, your spinal column supporting the head and the shoulders, the spinal column, the core of our body resting on the pelvic bone. And then inching our sensations outward towards the skin, that which we often refer to as the sense of touch. The sense of touch, one of the five senses, and at this particular moment representing our main doorway into the present moment. What does the surface under your body feel like? If you were a young child, if you were exploring these sensations for the first time, even if if you've sat on these cushions or chairs hundreds of times before, you might have missed something. How soft is it? How hard is it? How well does it mold to the shape of your body? How well does it help support your body? And also at the same time, notice the way in which your body, with its flesh, molds to that shape, especially where the shape or the texture is quite hard. And now these sensations just spreading throughout the body, but specifically those parts of the body, those parts of the lower body that are covered in clothing. And so from the surface underneath you, you allow yourself to experience whatever clothing it is that covers the lower parts of your body. For some of us, we're in jogging bottoms and shorts or skirts. But those labels don't really matter. It's the texture of the material. How soft, how rough, how hard, how breathable. And no matter how thick or hard the material is, you'll notice how fluid it is because of the way in which it bends and wraps itself around your legs, around your knees. And then finding those folds. Are you sensitive enough? Is your sense of touch sensitive enough to pick up on the tiny folds and the thin layers of warm air trapped underneath the fabric, between fabric and skin? And now the upper body. You can start off with the sleeves, whether you're wearing short or long sleeved tops. Finding the rim, that part which allows you to experience the contrast between skin that is directly exposed to the air around us and those parts which are covered. Notice how we're using the contrast. Notice how we are using the mind. We are using the mind the way it was always meant to be. The mind, a tool with which to explore the present moment. Not like many of us have become so accustomed to, of analyzing the past, reliving past traumas and pains, fearing uncertainties in the future. Those are examples of the mind using us and taking us away from the present moment. The reason we are entering into this practice is so that we ground ourselves in the present moment and discover for ourselves how we can choose the thoughts that are relevant to us at this particular point in time called the present moment. Becoming the very directors of this play called the mind. And one thing you begin to notice is how the mind, it very easily gets bored, and that's quite normal because it's usually simply an indication of its very nature, how it likes to be stimulated. It usually likes interesting conversations, interesting people, movies, books. And sometimes, when there are none of those, it would rather be angry and miserable and sad because it wants to do something. And so instead of staying with the surfaces around our skin for too long, let's shift our focus to something completely different, but also a sense, another doorway into the present moment. And now the years, something which we've completely taken for granted because right from the beginning, right from the start of this practice, there's been my voice, there's been the ringing of the bell, there have been the sounds coming out of our computers as we switched them on. But now we use our sense of, or rather, we invite our attention to move towards the sense of hearing, where we allow the bell to represent a new beginning. That childlike quality resurfacing. Taking in not only the ring, the sound from this bell, but all of the other sounds around you, including the sound of my voice. And for me, I'll give you an example. I don't know if you can hear it, but because of the timing of this practice, it coincides with the lunchtime break at the school near my house. And so I can hear children laughing and playing and having all sorts of fun. That's a part of the symphony on my side of the world. On your side of the world, it can take many forms of bird song, of wind moving through leaves and branches on a tree outside of you, of traffic, of aeroplanes, of cars, of roadworks, of alarms. But we simply call it a symphony. And have you ever been for one of those concerts where the performer performed a completely new piece of music that you were completely unfamiliar with? And you still had a good time because you knew the artist. You knew where they were coming from. You knew that space from which the music was originating from. And so you enjoyed it. You may have called it a symphony. You might have called it jazz, classical, whatever. What if you were to see the sounds around you as no different? A symphony. That's how many facilitators refer to the practice of listening in the present moment. A symphony of sounds, which means every note has its place in this symphony. Notice how you become so much more accepting of these sounds, but not completely accepting because we are human after all. We have opinions, we have likes, we have dislikes. And when you turn your attention to the sense of hearing, the first thing you want to remind yourself is that your sense of hearing becomes your doorway into the present moment. And then you begin to notice the judgments, the likes, the dislikes. I wish that sound would go away. I wish that one would be softer. I like that one. I wish that would be a bit louder. And it goes on and on and on. But notice how these judgments, they usually relate to sounds that matter to you, sounds that you notice. And notice how you usually notice those sounds that you either like or dislike. And turn these likes and dislikes into a part of your practice. How do you do this? A crying baby outside your window. I wish this would go away. I don't like this. I'd like to turn the volume down. I wish somebody would give that baby a bottle of milk. You notice these words, these thoughts, these judgments. as being a part of your mind, as a part of your thought process. And remember how when we started this practice, we referred to the mind as constantly moving. So you don't need to move with the mind. You just bring yourself back using one of your doorways into the present moment. It might be your skin, or that which is here, that which is listening, that stillness, that presence which is listening. And soon these judgments, they begin fading away as you release them, like little soap bubbles popping. And sometimes you can just label them. Listening, listening. So you don't have to say listening to a baby. That's a part of the story. Listening to the baby crying for milk or crying in hunger, or listening to the workman doing the work outside or the car alarm. All of those contain a story. Just listening, 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 listening. You'd recite that with your mind silently, and you return back into the present moment as the judgment fades away and your identification shifts from thought and labeling into this moment. And if you want to explore your judgments a little bit more, now continue with your sense of hearing, but this time find sounds that you didn't notice before. Unless you're in a sensory deprivation tank, there are countless sounds around us. Many of which have simply passed unnoticed. The sound of a computer fan, the sound of a fridge or freezer in a different room or in the room that you're in, the sound of a plane flying overhead thousands, perhaps hundreds of miles above you that you hadn't noticed, that you simply allowed, that didn't matter much to you. The sound of your breath, the sound of your digestive system, the sound of your heart beating as it pumps blood through it. Many teachers teach meditation through this sense of listening, but what they normally guide you towards is the focusing on these sounds that you didn't notice. Because these sounds that you didn't notice, the computer fan, that somebody mowing the lawn in the distance, they no longer stimulate thought because You neither like them nor do you dislike them. And so when you focus on these sounds, it has a wonderful effect of slowing the thought process down. But this is a practice you can take with you wherever it is that you are. No matter how busy a street you are in, you will always find a sound that is neutral. And even if you don't, notice how there is a gap in between every sound. And notice how we have the tendency to focus on the sound but not the gap. This is a practice, as you would already recall me saying, where we learn to refocus our thought. And if we were to focus our attention on the gaps in between sounds, notice how every sound reaches a point where it stops, and then a new sound emerges. A very good example is my voice. If not for the gaps, the pauses, none of my words would ever make any sense. And as Eckhart Tolle often guides us, he talks about the words being of no consequence. The words, the sounds emanating from the vocal cords of the facilitator, simply guiding you towards that silence, those gaps. When we speak of silence, we also begin to notice the silence behind every sound that allows these sounds to be audible, to be heard. The silence behind every note in the music that we hear. The silence behind every sound in the voices. And the bird song and everything else. When you notice these gaps of silence in between the sounds, why not use it as an opportunity to dive in? With the ringing of this bell, dive into the silence. Find yourself falling into one of those gaps. Falling deeper and deeper and deeper into the stillness that is at the core of your very being. The silence that has always been here, but that we have found ourselves quite distracted from because of all of the noise within the mind. the forms, the voices. And now your attention shifting back from the sense of hearing back to the sense of touch, but this time the nostrils, and the nasal passage, where we will observe our breath. Because just like those neutral sounds, those sounds that meant very little to us, that had the ability to quieten the mind, you will find many practices such as this directing you towards the breath, simply because for most of us, not all of us, but for most of us, the breath is quite neutral. It's it's just something that unfolds in the background from moment to moment. And it's a really good example of that which we often refer to as well-being. The eternal well-being. I think when you look at many books, they talk about they refer to nature as one of our greatest teachers in well-being. There are verses in the Bible and many other books that talk about just watching flowers like the lilies in the field and watching how they never worry about when the sun is going to rise, when the rainfall is going to arrive. They're simply present. And that goes for most of the wild animals as well, simply present in the moment, not worrying too much, possibly instinctively migrating in particular directions as the earth calls them to those places where there may be more food or water, but without the usual anxiety and concern and worry that many of us carry. Well-being. And that's a little bit like our breath. If you forget to breathe, nothing's going to happen. You're going to continue breathing. And so we bring our attention to the sensations. It's mainly the sensations that we seek to tap into. And by this, I simply refer to the temperature of the breath flowing in and the temperature of the air flowing out. You notice changes. And notice you can only notice changes because the mind is present with you. Because you are using the mind to filter out these sensations. You know what warm air is simply because you remember what cool air was. And the same with humidity levels. You notice the crisp, cool air flowing in, and then there's so much more vivid warmth and humid air as it moves down and brushes through the rims and the nasal passage. As you direct your mind's attention to this area where it explores the breath, you discover another fascinating quality of the mind and its ability to think of only one thing at a time, its ability to focus on only one thing at a time. And if you get glimpses into stillness, into peace, into quiet, into that sense of letting go and relief, it's usually because your mind has left its stories behind, its bank accounts, its finances, its relationships, its conversations, its health issues. It's left all of that behind as it arrives more completely and more fully into the present moment. And if you feel bored, again, a wonderful indication that we are simply thinking about the breath. But we're not interested in thinking about the breath. Who could think about a more boring subject to think about? We wouldn't really want to read a PhD about the breath. No, we're just more interested in just experiencing it with the quality called the beginner's mind. And so every intake of breath becomes the first breath taken in. Every exhalation can represent a complete letting go and a complete releasing. And one beautiful thing about this practice is that it doesn't matter if your mind drifted away during the last breath. It doesn't matter if your last 100 breaths were unconscious. Because as you're discovering in this practice, only one moment is relevant and of interest, and that is this moment. And at this moment, which direction is your breath flowing? Is it in or out? Let's see our breath as a bridge between this world outside and around us, and the space within. How, how much space is there within? When you explore shamanism, in fact, even Christian writers like Joseph Benner, Eastern teachings, there is a theory. Let's just call it a theory. That the whole world around us that we experience through our senses is but a reflection of the space within. Which is why so many of us enjoy the sea, gazing into the ocean, which seems limitless, seems vast. We love looking at sand dunes, And on a clear night, staring into the sky with its Milky Way and its stars, let's just assume that there's something to that theory. That everything on the outside is but a reflection, a glimpse into what is within us. And let us use our breath as the bridge between this world around us, which is constantly going through change. Right from our bodies, since we began this practice, there have been countless cells that have disappeared and new cells have emerged within our own bodies. We heard through our sense of hearing sounds coming and going. And as we pan out, we begin to see the countless relationships that have passed through our own experiences. People came, people went. Our pets, they came and they went, and new ones came in. We've moved through different homes, different countries. Everything undergoing change in the world outside of us. Even the atoms and the molecules and the furniture around us constantly undergoing change. The paint molecules on the walls around us, all experienced through our five senses. But now let us bring our attention to the breath and allow this bridge, just allow, not force, but allow the bridge to transport us into that part within us that is unchanging, unmoving, that has watched all of this change transpire around us. That unmoving observer, that unmoving witness that watched our bodies grow from the 5-year-old to the 10-year-old, from the 10-year-old to the 20-year-old, and wherever it is that we find ourselves in, countless changes, new skeletal systems, new skin tissue, constantly undergoing change. But there was one part that was constant, unmoving, unchanging. And now, as you bring your attention to your breath, change the pace of your breathing by breathing in as deeply as you can. Possibly even pausing as you've reached the capacity of your lungs and your stomach, and then taking in a little bit more air. And the out breath is quite different because you're going to breathe out as slowly, as quietly, as gently as you comfortably can. Magnifying every sensation. Not thinking too much about the breath, but simply experiencing it in this new rhythm, in this new way. And as you follow your breath in, following it down your throat, following it down your chest, following it down into your stomach as the stomach wall rises. And as the stomach wall falls, when you breathe out, the breath moving upward and outward down the nasal passage, out of the rims, back into this world where there is so much change. There are sounds, there is the body. And then breathing in, diving in underneath that surface, almost as though a good metaphor would be the silence underneath the lake. Underneath a large body of water, where on the surface the waves are choppy. There are changing wind conditions. There may be birds. There may be clouds. There may be storms. But as you breathe in, you follow your breath and you dive underneath the surface. Give yourself the magical ability to process breath underwater so that it just becomes one of experiencing the silence and the stillness and the unmoving witness. And you haven't quite found the limits to this depth. Just as when you stared into space, into the sky, not knowing what was out there, not knowing where it ended. Each practice, a new beginning, allowing you to experience new levels, new depths in the stillness, in the kindness, in the generosity, in the wisdom that is beyond the mind, beyond form, but often mistakenly leads us to believe ourselves to be separate from each other, to be separate from our animals, to be separate from nature, to be separate from the minerals and all else that is but a reflection of who we truly are. At least that's what the teachers sometimes say when they describe this practice. Perhaps another reason why we invoke the beginner's mind, so that we step away from that which we believe we know, so that we, like the child we once were, become open to things new. And now the final bell in our practice. Followed always by a bell that represents the beginning of the true practice, where we bring this silence, this stillness, this presence, this kindness, this wisdom, this infinite patience with us as we watch, as we experience, as we hear, as we smell, as we taste the world unfolding before us from moment to moment, breath to breath, and bite to bite, and step to step, and so on.